Long before the headlines, before the music videos, and before the world knew her as Magnolia Shorty, there was a little girl growing up inside the Magnolia Projects of New Orleans. Life there was never easy. The Magnolia Projects stood as one of the most challenging public housing communities in the city. Poverty touched nearly every family. Violence was not unusual. Many children grew up learning survival long before they learned opportunity. Yet even in the middle of hardship, music flowed through the neighborhood like a second language. Music came from open windows. It poured from corner stores. It echoed through block parties that transformed ordinary streets into celebrations of resilience. That environment shaped Magnolia Shorty from the very beginning. Born Renata Yemekalo on September 30, 1982, she grew up surrounded by the sounds that would later become the heartbeat of New Orleans bounce music. While many young people dreamed of escaping the neighborhood, Renata found inspiration within it. The energy, humor, rhythm, and spirit of the streets became part of her identity. Family members remembered a child who loved attention. She enjoyed dancing. She loved entertaining people. Most importantly, she carried a confidence that seemed larger than her age. As a teenager, she began spending time around local DJs, performers, and neighborhood parties where bounce music was rapidly evolving into a cultural movement. The music was loud, energetic, and unapologetically local. It belonged to New Orleans in a way that outsiders often struggled to understand. For young Renata, it felt like home. One person who recognized her potential early was the legendary New Orleans bounce pioneer DJ Jimmy. He noticed her charisma, her energy, and her ability to command attention whenever she stepped near a microphone. That opportunity changed everything. Under his mentorship, Renata began recording music and performing at local events. She adopted the stage name Magnolia Shorty as a tribute to the neighborhood that raised her. The name carried pride. It carried history. It carried the spirit of the Magnolia Projects wherever she went. Soon, people across New Orleans began paying attention. Her voice stood out immediately. She delivered lyrics with confidence, attitude, and authenticity. Unlike many artists trying to imitate trends from elsewhere, Magnolia Shorty sounded unmistakably New Orleans. Her music reflected the streets she knew, the culture she loved, and the community she represented. Songs like Monkey on the Dick and You Heard Me became local anthems. Crowds responded instantly. Neighborhood parties turned into packed performances. Her reputation continued growing throughout the city. At the time when bounce music remained largely regional, Magnolia Shorty became one of its most visible female voices. In a genre often dominated by male performers, she carved out her own space through personality, determination, and raw talent. By her early 20s, she had become much more than a local artist. She had become a symbol of New Orleans culture itself. And just as her career seemed ready to reach a larger national audience, one of the most devastating events in the city's history arrived. Huracán Katrina. The storm would change New Orleans forever. And it would change Magnolia Shorty's life as well. The opportunity arrived long before most people outside New Orleans had ever heard the term bounce music. By the mid-1990s, Cash Money Records was still building its identity. The label had not yet become the global powerhouse it would later become, but inside Louisiana, excitement was growing. New artists were emerging, local audiences were paying attention, and a unique New Orleans sound was beginning to take shape. Magnolia Shorty found herself at the center of that movement. Signing with Cash Money Records at such a young age placed her in an environment few children could even imagine. Recording studios replaced playgrounds. Music meetings replaced ordinary after-school activities. While many teenagers were still discovering who they wanted to become, Magnolia Shorty was already learning how the music business worked. It was not always easy. Being a young female artist in Southern rap during that era came with challenges. Most of the spotlight focused on male performers. Opportunities were limited, expectations were high, and competition was fierce. Yet Magnolia Shorty refused to let those obstacles define her. She developed a style that felt completely her own. Her voice was energetic. Her delivery was fearless. Most importantly, she represented New Orleans without compromise. Listeners connected with that authenticity immediately. As bounce music continued evolving, Magnolia Shorty became one of its most recognizable young voices. The genre was unlike anything else in hip-hop. Built around call-and-response chants, powerful beats, neighborhood slang, and non-stop energy, bounce reflected the spirit of New Orleans itself. It was loud. It was joyful. It was unapologetically local. Magnolia Shorty fit perfectly into that world. In 1997, she released her debut album, Monkey on the $D%K, becoming one of the youngest artists associated with Cash Money Records. The project helped establish her reputation throughout Louisiana and introduced her to a larger audience. Songs from the album quickly became staples at parties, clubs, and community celebrations. The success continued growing. People admired her confidence. They admired her work ethic. They admired the way she carried herself despite her age. As the years passed, Magnolia Shorty transformed from a promising young performer into one of the defining figures of bounce music. While many artists came and went, she remained connected to the culture that had raised her. That loyalty mattered. Fans saw her as more than an entertainer. She represented the Magnolia Projects. She represented New Orleans. She represented every young girl who dreamed of being heard in a genre dominated by men. Then came 2005. When Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans, the disaster changed countless lives overnight. Entire neighborhoods were flooded. Familias were displaced. Communities that had existed for generations suddenly found themselves scattered across the country. Like thousands of others, Magnolia Shorty was forced to leave the city she loved. But even after the storm, she never stopped representing New Orleans. Wherever she traveled, she carried the city's music, culture, and resilience with her. As the city slowly rebuilt, Magnolia Shorty became one of the artists helping preserve its spirit. She performed at events supporting recovery efforts, recorded new music, and continued promoting bounce music to audiences who had never experienced it before. Many people began referring to her by a title that felt earned rather than given. The Queen of Bounce Music. And just as national attention toward New Orleans culture was beginning to grow again, Magnolia Shorty appeared poised to reach an entirely new level of success. The biggest chapter of her career was still ahead. Tragically, so was the darkest chapter of her life. Success often creates the illusion that the hardest battles are over. For Magnolia Shorty, the years following her rise through Cash Money Records should have been a time of celebration. She had earned the respect of New Orleans audiences, built a recognizable name in bounce music, and established herself as one of the few women capable of commanding attention in a genre largely dominated by men. But life rarely follows a straight path. As the 2000s progressed, New Orleans faced challenges that reached far beyond music. Poverty, crime, displacement, and economic uncertainty continued affecting many communities throughout the city. Even successful artists often found themselves navigating environments where danger never seemed completely far away. Then came Hurricane Katrina. In August 2005, one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history changed everything. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath floodwaters. Familias were separated. Lives were uprooted overnight. The Magnolia Projects, the place that had shaped Magnolia Shorty's identity and inspired her stage name, suffered tremendous damage. Like countless residents, she was forced to leave the city she loved and start over elsewhere. For many artists, such disruption might have ended a career. For Magnolia Shorty, it became another reason to keep going. As New Orleans residents scattered across the country, they carried their culture with them. Bounce music traveled too. Suddenly, audiences in cities far beyond Louisiana were hearing the sounds that had once belonged almost exclusively to New Orleans neighborhoods. Magnolia Shorty embraced that responsibility. She performed wherever opportunities appeared. She represented New Orleans proudly. She became one of the cultural ambassadors helping preserve the city's identity during one of its darkest periods. People who attended her performances often noticed something remarkable. No matter where she performed, she made audiences feel as though they were standing in New Orleans. The energy, the humor, the resilience. It all remained present. As the city slowly rebuilt, Magnolia Shorty returned frequently, determined to contribute to its recovery. Friends described her as optimistic despite the challenges surrounding her. She continued recording music, appearing at community events, and encouraging younger artists trying to find their own path. Her influence within bounce music continued growing. A new generation of performers looked up to her. Young women especially saw someone who had succeeded without abandoning her roots. She never tried to become something she wasn't. She remained authentic to the culture that had supported her from the beginning. Behind the scenes, however, life was becoming more complicated. The music industry was changing rapidly. Record sales declined. Independent artists faced increasing pressure to adapt. Competition intensified as social media and digital platforms transformed how audiences discovered music. Like many performers, Magnolia Shorty worked constantly to maintain momentum. Yet she remained hopeful about the future. Friends recalled conversations about new projects, new music, new opportunities. There was a growing sense that bounce music was finally beginning to receive national recognition, and Magnolia Shorty was positioned to benefit from that attention. For someone who had spent her life fighting for every opportunity, the future seemed brighter than it had in years. She was only 28 years old. She still had dreams to chase. She still had music to create. She still had plans for the years ahead. No one around her could have imagined how quickly everything was about to change. Just days before Christmas in 2010, a routine afternoon would become one of the most tragic moments in New Orleans music history. By late 2010, Magnolia Shorty seemed to be entering a new phase of her life. The struggles that had once threatened to derail her career no longer appeared to define her future. She had rebuilt her reputation through persistence, hard work, and an unwavering commitment to New Orleans culture. Bounce music was receiving greater recognition than ever before, and many believed Magnolia Shorty was finally positioned to enjoy the rewards she had spent years earning. Friends noticed a renewed sense of purpose. She was recording again, performing regularly, planning for the future. Most importantly, she appeared happy. People close to her described someone who remained deeply connected to her community despite the growing opportunities surrounding her. She never forgot where she came from. Whether she was performing for large crowds or attending local gatherings, she carried the same energy that had first made people notice her as a teenager. New projects were taking shape. Collaborations were being discussed. Momentum was building. For the first time in years, it seemed as though everything was finally coming together. Then came December 20th, 2010. The holiday season had arrived in New Orleans. Familias were preparing for Christmas. Neighborhoods were decorated. Many people were looking forward to spending time with loved ones after another difficult year. That afternoon, Magnolia Shorty was riding through a gated community in eastern New Orleans with a companion, Jerome Hampton. Neither of them knew they were being watched. As their vehicle moved through the neighborhood, gunfire suddenly erupted. The attack was swift, relentless, terrifying. Witnesses later reported hearing dozens of shots. The vehicle was struck repeatedly. When the gunfire finally stopped, Magnolia Shorty and Hampton had suffered fatal injuries. She was only 28 years old. The news spread through New Orleans almost immediately. Shock turned into disbelief. Disbelief turned into grief. For many residents, it felt painfully familiar. The city had already lost so many talented voices to violence. Now another beloved figure had been taken far too soon. Fans gathered to mourn. Artists paid tribute. Radio stations played her music throughout the city. People who had grown up listening to her struggled to understand how someone who had survived so much could have her life end so suddenly. Investigators launched an extensive homicide investigation. The case attracted significant attention throughout Louisiana because Magnolia Shorty was more than a local entertainer. She was one of the most recognizable ambassadors of New Orleans bounce culture. Her death represented a loss not only for her family and friends, but also for an entire musical community. As details emerged, authorities suggested the attack appeared targeted rather than random. That revelation only deepened the heartbreak. Questions filled conversations across the city. Why her? Why now? Why after everything she had already overcome? For months, answers remained elusive. The grief, however, remained constant. New Orleans had lost one of its own. A young woman who had transformed neighborhood dreams into reality. A performer who carried the spirit of the Magnolia Projects onto stages throughout the South. A pioneer who helped open doors for women in bounce music. And a voice that many believed still had so much left to give. The tragedy of Magnolia Shorty's death shocked the city. But what happened afterward revealed just how deeply she had touched the lives of people throughout New Orleans and beyond. The investigation that followed Magnolia Shorty's death became one of the most closely watched cases in New Orleans during that period. For months, friends, family members, fellow artists, and fans searched for answers. The brutality of the attack shocked even people accustomed to hearing difficult news. More than simply losing a musician, New Orleans had lost a cultural ambassador whose life story represented resilience, determination, and hope. Authorities worked tirelessly to identify those responsible. Witnesses were interviewed. Evidence was collected. Leads were pursued. Eventually, investigators concluded that the attack had been carefully planned rather than random. Several years later, arrests were made, and individuals connected to the shooting were prosecuted. While the legal process provided some measure of accountability, it could never restore what had been lost. The grief remained. Yet something remarkable happened in the years after her death. Magnolia Shorty's influence continued growing. Rather than fading from memory, her music found new audiences. As bounce music gained wider recognition across the United States, younger listeners began discovering the artists who helped build the genre from the ground up. Among those pioneers, Magnolia Shorty's name appeared again and again. Her importance became impossible to ignore. Artists who followed her openly acknowledged her impact. Women entering bounce music often pointed to her as proof that success was possible. Fans remembered the energy she brought to every performance. And New Orleans continued celebrating her contribution to the city's cultural identity. One of the most powerful examples of her lasting influence came when global superstar Beyoncé sampled Magnolia Shorty's voice in her song Formation. For many listeners, it became an introduction to an artist they had never known before. For New Orleans residents, it felt like recognition that had been earned years earlier. Suddenly, people around the world were hearing a piece of Magnolia Shorty's legacy. The queen of bounce music was reaching audiences she never had the chance to see during her lifetime. That moment carried deep meaning. Because Magnolia Shorty's story was never simply about tragedy. It was about perseverance. It was about a young girl from the Magnolia Projects who refused to let circumstances define her future. It was about surviving family hardship, industry challenges, personal setbacks, and one of the worst natural disasters in American history. It was about representing New Orleans with pride no matter where life took her. Most of all, it was about inspiring others. When people speak about Magnolia Shorty today, they often remember her music first. But those who knew her personally remember something else. They remember her generosity. They remember her loyalty. They remember her willingness to help others even while fighting her own battles. Those qualities rarely appear in headlines. Yet they are often the truest measure of a life. Today, Magnolia Shorty remains one of the most important figures in bounce music history. Her recordings continue playing at parties, festivals, community gatherings, and celebrations throughout New Orleans. New generations continue discovering her voice. Scholars and music historians increasingly recognize her role in shaping a genre that influenced modern hip-hop far beyond Louisiana. Her life ended far too soon. She was only 28 years old. But legacy is not measured only by years. Sometimes it is measured by impact. And by that standard, Magnolia Shorty's influence remains extraordinary. So many people leave behind awards. So many leave behind wealth. Others leave behind memories that continue inspiring people long after they are gone. Magnolia Shorty left behind all three elements that define a cultural icon: music, representation, and hope. And somewhere in New Orleans, when the speakers get loud, the crowd starts moving, and bounce music takes over the room, her spirit still feels present. Not as a victim. Not as a headline. But as the queen of bounce music who helped make an entire city dance. So many careers are measured by chart positions. Others are measured by awards, record sales, or headlines. The legacy of Magnolia Shorty was measured differently. It lived in the neighborhoods where her music first poured from open windows on warm New Orleans afternoons. It lived in the crowded block parties where bounce music became more than entertainment and transformed into a celebration of identity, resilience, and community. It lived in the dreams of young artists who saw someone from their own streets achieve what once seemed impossible. Although her life ended far too soon, her influence never disappeared. For many fans, Magnolia Shorty remains one of the most important figures in New Orleans music history. Long before major record labels and national audiences fully appreciated the cultural significance of bounce music, she was helping shape its future. Her performances, confidence, and unmistakable energy helped establish a foundation that countless artists would continue building upon for years. The impact of Magnolia Shorty reached far beyond music itself. She represented perseverance. She represented authenticity. She represented the belief that talent could emerge from communities often overlooked by the rest of the world. Her story challenged assumptions about who gets to succeed and whose voices deserve to be heard. Years after her passing, her influence continued finding new audiences. As New Orleans culture increasingly reached mainstream music, elements of bounce music began appearing in some of the biggest songs in the world. Artists, producers, and fans who may never have visited Louisiana suddenly found themselves connected to traditions that pioneers like Magnolia Shorty helped preserve and popularize. For longtime supporters, those moments felt meaningful. Not because they erased the tragedy of her loss, but because they confirmed that her contribution mattered. The story of Magnolia Shorty is also a story about potential. It reminds us how many gifted people never receive the years they deserve. It reminds us how fragile success can be. It reminds us how quickly life can change, even when everything appears to be moving in the right direction. Most importantly, it reminds us why preserving local culture matters. Without artists like Magnolia Shorty, entire chapters of Black music history risk fading from memory. The sounds, stories, and experiences of communities like the Magnolia Projects helped shape modern American music in ways that are still being recognized today. Throughout New Orleans, her name continues to be spoken with respect. Her music still fills speakers at celebrations and gatherings. Her influence remains present in bounce music. Her journey continues inspiring women pursuing careers in hip-hop and independent music. A voice that once echoed through neighborhood streets never completely disappeared. It simply became part of the city itself. Perhaps that is the true measure of legacy. Not fame. Not wealth. Not even success. But the ability to leave something behind that continues helping others long after you are gone. Magnolia Shorty achieved that. She transformed personal struggle into creativity. She transformed local recognition into cultural influence. She transformed a dream born inside the Magnolia Projects into a legacy that still resonates today. When people remember Magnolia Shorty, they remember more than an artist. They remember a symbol of New Orleans. A pioneer of bounce music. A mentor. A survivor. And a young woman whose voice became part of the heartbeat of an entire city. Magnolia Shorty may be gone, but her music remains. Her influence remains. And in New Orleans, where culture and memory are woven together through music, her echo continues to travel through every beat, every celebration,